Alright, picture this. You're out in the sticks. I mean, deep in the sticks. No cell service, no streetlights, just miles of trees and the kind of silence that actually hums. You're alone. Totally, completely alone. And then that silence breaks. Not with the hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves. No, it breaks with something else. Something that shouldn't be there. Something that knows you're alone. Something that's been waiting. Today's story comes from a viewer named Sarah. She sent this in a few months back, and every time I read it, it gives me chills, because this isn't some made-up campfire tale. This is what she lived through, in a cabin tucked away in the desolate woods of Oregon. A place where the trees themselves seem to whisper secrets, and the shadows hide things that refuse to stay hidden. This is what happens when you're not just alone in the dark, but you realize something else is there with you. Sarah had taken on a house-sitting gig for her eccentric aunt, who owned this ancient, sprawling cabin way up in the Cascade foothills. The aunt was off on some spiritual retreat, and Sarah, a college student needing a break from city life, jumped at the chance. Fresh air, peace and quiet, a chance to catch up on some reading. It sounded perfect. The cabin itself was a marvel of rustic charm, old-growth timber, a huge stone fireplace, and windows that looked out onto an unbroken sea of evergreen. But even on that first sunny afternoon, as Sarah unlocked the heavy oak door, a faint, metallic smell seemed to cling to the air inside. Not unpleasant, exactly, but distinct, like old iron and damp earth. She shrugged it off, attributing it to a house that had been closed up for a while. The first couple of days were blissful. She hiked, read, cooked simple meals, and luxuriated in the profound quiet. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the pines, the distant cry of a hawk, and the gentle crackle of the fireplace in the evenings. She loved it. That sense of utter solitude, of being disconnected from everything, was exactly what she'd craved. Then things started getting weird. It began subtly. A book she'd left on the coffee table would be slightly askew the next morning. A kitchen cabinet she swore she'd closed would be ajar. Tiny things, easily dismissed. Just my imagination, she'd tell herself. Or maybe I'm just more tired than I thought. But then the sound started. At first she thought it was the house settling. Old timber, cold nights, it makes sense, right? A creak here, a groan there. But these sounds were different. They were rhythmic. Like a slow, deliberate thumpy thump coming from upstairs, when she knew for a fact there was nothing but a dusty guest bedroom and a storage attic up there. She'd freeze, listen intently, and the sounds would stop. The moment she moved, they'd start again, sometimes closer. One evening, while reading by the fire, a sudden cold draft swept through the living room, raising goosebumps on her arms. All the windows and doors were shut. She looked up, and for a split second, she thought she saw a shadow coalesce in the far corner, deeper than any natural shadow, almost like a tear in the fabric of the room. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She started checking locks obsessively. Every window latch, every deadbolt, double-checked before bed. She'd bring her dog, Buster, a scruffy terrier mix, to stay on her bed at night, hoping his presence would make her feel safer. But Buster, usually a brave little watchdog, was acting strange too. He'd stare intently at empty corners, his hackles slightly raised, letting out low, guttural growls at absolutely nothing. Sometimes he'd whimper and try to bury his head under her arm, trembling. That was new, that was truly unsettling. The whispers began on her fifth night. Sarah woke up abruptly, bathed in a cold sweat. Not from a nightmare, but from a distinct, raspy whisper right next to her ear. It wasn't words she could understand, just a guttural, breathy sound, like dry leaves scraping together, but intimately close. She shot upright, heart pounding, scanning the pitch-black room. Nothing, the window was shut. Buster was whimpering beside her. From that moment on, the cabin felt different. It wasn't just a house, it was a presence, a dark, watchful entity. The silence became oppressive, heavy with unspoken menace. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe. She started seeing things in her peripheral vision, a fleeting movement behind a curtain, a distortion in her reflection in the dark window panes. She knew she wasn't alone, and whatever it wasn't friendly. The absolute worst night was still to come. It was a Saturday, a violent thunderstorm rolled in from the coast, plunging the entire area into darkness. The power went out with a violent crack of thunder, leaving Sarah in complete suffocating blackness. She fumbled for her phone, its weak flashlight beam her only comfort. Buster was a ball of shaking fur on her bed, whimpering incessantly. She decided to make her way to the living room, to the fireplace, hoping to light some candles. As she shuffled down the hallway, her phone light bouncing nervously, she heard it, a faint, sickening squelch from the kitchen. Like something wet being dragged across the linoleum. Her breath hitched, she froze. Then, a slow, deliberate thump, drag started from the dining room, moving towards the living room. It wasn't the settling of the house, it was heavy. It was purposeful, and it was getting closer. Sarah's blood ran cold, she couldn't move. The sounds grew louder, clearer. She could almost feel the vibrations through the old wooden floorboards. Thump, drag. It sounded like something large, something broken, being pulled across the floor. Then the rhythmic sound stopped. Silence descended again, thicker and more terrifying than before. She could hear her own heart thundering in her ears, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive dark. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing it was all a dream. When she opened them, her phone beam caught a glint in the living room. Just beyond the archway, where the dining room met the living room, two pinpricks of light, reflective, but not like eyes, not quite, more like wet marbles, and they were low to the ground, very low, then a whisper. Not a dry, raspy one this time. This was a guttural, wet sound, a distorted, mocking imitation of her own name. SSS-sa-ra-ra, it hissed, right from the living room, directly ahead of her. The sound was so foul, so full of malevolence, it felt like it was physically scratching at her eardrums. She dropped her phone. The light flickered out as it hit the floor, plunging her into utter, absolute darkness. Her heart leaped into her throat. She could hear Buster's terrified whimpers behind her, but she couldn't move. She was paralyzed by pure primal terror. Then the cold, not just a draft, but an invading, bone-chilling cold that seeped into her very marrow, suffocating her. It was heavy, a palpable presence wrapping around her, and the metallic, damp earth smell from her first day, it was back, stronger now, almost choking her, mingled with something else, something foul and rotten. She heard a soft scrape directly in front of her, the sound of fingernails, long and jagged, being dragged across the wooden floorboards, and then a sound that made her stomach churn, a wet, slobbering sound. Like something trying to breathe, trying to speak, but failing. Sarah stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet, scrambling blindly in the dark. She just needed to get to her bedroom, to the door. She didn't care about anything else. Just the door. Her hands scraped against the wall, finding the frame, then the handle. She fumbled, tears streaming down her face, the metallic, wet scent growing stronger, the slobbering sound closer now, right behind her. She could feel the icy breath on the back of her neck. She burst into her bedroom, slamming the door shut and fumbling for the lock. She pushed the dresser in front of it, frantically, clumsily. Buster, somehow, was already under the bed, whimpering. She crawled into bed, pulling the covers over her head, shaking uncontrollably. She lay there, listening. The thumping drag started again, from the hallway outside her room. It moved closer, pausing just outside her door. She could feel the intense, malevolent focus emanating through the wood. The air in her room dropped to an unnatural, biting cold. Then the doorknob slowly, painstakingly, began to turn. Click, click, as if something was trying to unlatch it. Sarah let out a strangled sob. The dresser, heavy as it was, shuddered slightly as something on the other side bumped against it. A wet, scraping sound came from just above the doorknob, and then a low, guttural chuckle. It wasn't human. It was ancient, predatory, and utterly delighted by her fear. It echoed in her small room, a sound so vile it seemed to corrupt the very air. She squeezed her eyes shut, prayed, cried, and waited. Hours crawled by like an eternity. The sounds outside her door continued intermittently, soft scrapes, wet sounds, the distinct feeling of being watched, even through the thick wood. She could feel its presence, a heavy, suffocating weight pressed against her door. Then slowly, agonizingly, the first sliver of dawn painted the sky outside her window a sickly gray. As the light grew, ever so slightly, The oppressive cold in her room began to lift. The sounds outside faded. The horrible metallic stench receded. As soon as she could see her hand in front of her face, Sarah was out of bed. She shoved the dresser aside, her muscles aching, and flung open the door. The hallway was empty. The entire cabin was silent, too silent. The air, though still cold, was no longer freezing. The horrible smell was gone. She didn't bother with her phone. She didn't bother with her aunt's things. She grabbed Buster, who was still whimpering under the bed, and ran. Out of the cabin, down the porch steps, past the ancient, whispering trees, and didn't stop until she hit the main road, miles away. She never went back. Her aunt, when she returned from her retreat, just gave Sarah a knowing look when she heard the story. Didn't deny it, didn't question it, just looked as if she understood. Sarah still has nightmares. She can still hear that wet, guttural chuckle. She can still feel the icy breath on her neck. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, she swears she hears a faint, distant thumping drag from somewhere deep in the silence. It makes her wonder, was it just in the cabin, or did it follow her? Because some things, once awakened, don't stay contained. They find a way out, and they remember you. They always remember.